Hi, this is Mr. Payne. I'm here to teach you a little bit about wire repair. So some of the things you need to know about wire repair is wires will often need replaced because of corrosion. Sometimes they wiggle and they break because of just motion. But nonetheless, you're going to have to restore wiring harnesses back to their factory configuration. Old school redneck way, you would take a piece of wire like this, you cut it, strip it, and they would just twist them together, and then they get your electrical tape and they would, if they were lucky, get a little bit of tape on there to try to code it and correct it. Okay, even if they taped it on real super tight, it was never a really good seal. So what would happen is, even though it looks like it's going to be fixed, it might work for now, it might work for another year. But what happens is water corrosion and all the other elements could get inside there and cause the wires to corrode, and then that repair is not going to last very long. So we're going to concentrate mainly on the way you repair wires correctly so that you don't have to worry about having it come back in a year. So a couple things you need to know about the different tools. That's a pair of crimpers. This end crimps, this end cuts. These little different size holes strip. On this tool itself, it has little baby numbers on it to tell you what gauge wire you're stripping. Somewhere along the way, our industry has decided that color coding things is the way to go so that things can be a universal language. These same colors apply overseas. They apply to different fields like HVAC, electrical occupations. But what these colors indicate is the different gauges of wiring that you can use these particular connectors on. Like for example, this guy here is 10 to 12 gauge wire, which is a thicker wire, whereas that guy is like a 14 to 22. Okay, that's kind of in between the two of them. What makes it nice is you can actually just like know what color or what gauge of wire you're using, and know what color connector you need for it, and just go buy that color connector. All right, these are okay, except for this plastic around here is not shrink wrap. That's just plastic. It's just a protector. But the way that these work is that you would either put your wire in there and take your crimpers like this, find the colored hole that you use, and try to get on that metal part that's inside of there, and squeeze. When you squeeze, it crimps in on the wire. I'll do a quick demonstration here to show you. So I cut the wire, I want to strip my wire, and then try not to have any open strands. You want to kind of close these up so they're not like looking like fur. Put them on like so. I'm going to use these crimpers. These crimpers got that little dot there. Put them on there, give it a squeeze gently. It puts a little divot right there. I pull back on the connector. This connector is not coming off anytime soon. It's on there pretty good, which that's a pretty good connection, but like I said with the black tape, it's not sealed. Okay, so it's going to need shrink wrap or some other kind of sealer on it, which I'll get to in a second. So another type of connector like that is these guys. They come in different sizes as well, depending on what you're trying to connect together. And what I usually do with these is you definitely need shrink wrap on them, but they work in a similar fashion to these without the plastic coating. So if I was going to apply one of these, I could strip my wire again, and then I can make sure my little braids are okay, and I can slide this on here like so, and I can crimp it on with these crimpers. But we also got these other ones that are like really cool. These are like a ratcheting one. They got double-sided jaws in them. They're kind of thick. They got the color codes like we had before. And I can actually put these in here and crimp them both sides of the wire at a time if I wanted to. I could put the wire on one side, I could put the wire on the other side, and these ratchet down and they crimp them on. I prefer these. Give it a little squeeze, nice and crimped. I give it a pull, it doesn't come off. Now, with these, you definitely need what's called shrink wrap, which this is a variation of shrink wrap. I'll show you here in a minute. It shrinks down like way smaller than you can see it right here. What you do is, we don't need this length. We'll probably just cut it down to about there, slide it over the connector, and then we're going to use a heat gun and we're going to actually shrink that to the wire. Here's another form of shrink wrap that comes in different rolls, and you have to be aware that these all come in different diameters as well. So you want to make sure that you know what you're about to work on before you go purchase a roll of this stuff. But this roll here comes from Harbor Freight, and they have like 3 different sizes there. I always just stock up all 3. This other piece I showed you, it comes out of a kit. These kits can kind of be a little bit pricey, but these kits last a little bit. But unless you're working on industrial house wire, you don't need these bigger size ones. I mean, that thing there, you can seal like a big cable with. You're mainly going to deal out of this size here. Alright. Other type of connectors that we can see but we don't like to use. These are what's called a Scotch lock connector. The way that these work, they got that little metal blade right there. You open these up. If you look, there's a crevice for wires to go down into on both sides. And what you do is you'll close this up with the wire in there. You don't even have to even strip them. You just put that bare wire in there. Just like so. Till it stops. Then you can close this on it. And then what you do is you get a pair of pliers. Not a pair of pliers, but you get a pair of pliers and you push this metal blade goes down, it pierces that coating and actually allows for the power to flow through there. So that blade will be a bridge between the wire going in from this side and going in from this side. And again, these things here have a problem with corrosion. And you obviously can't actively shrink wrap or heat shrink these in because of different various sizes. These shrink wrap shrinks, but it doesn't shrink that much. So we don't like to use these. If you happen to work on a vehicle and it has a bunch of electrical problems and you see these on the car and it has anything to do with the circuit you're working on, tell your customer you need to take all these Scotch locks off and do a proper wiring job on the car before you can do any further. I run into a lot of dump trucks and box trucks that have a crap ton of these on them, and every single time these were the problem, because when they were built they worked great, but once a bunch of water and corrosion got in there, everything stopped working, lights and backup beepers and such. Another type of connector you're going to see is these guys. These are twist-on caps. We mainly use these in the household industry, sometimes with appliance repairs. We very rarely will use these on cars, and if you do see them on a car, it's because some do-it-yourselfer decided to wire something up on their car. These are the same thing. You can't really heat shrink these too well. You can basically put the 2 wires together. These actually will screw in. There's like a little spring in there that creates threads. It'll lock itself on there, but all the water and corrosion can still get inside. Alright, in addition to these guys being used to crimp on connectors, we sometimes run into these big lugs. This is for a starter, something that requires a large gauge wire. Obviously you're not going to crimp this on with this. If you want to be all redneck about it, you can stick your wire down inside the end of this. You pull it out the bag here. You can put your wire down inside the end of this, and then you could take it to a vise and you can smash it with a hammer, which will sometimes be alright. I've used that method for years. But they do make a special tool. It looks like a little C-clamp, and it's got like a little divot on the inside. And what you do with this is you'll actually put this in, put your wire in there, and then you're going to clamp this down with a wrench, and that will smash the wire, and that actually puts a divot in there. It helps to lock it in place. It works much better. This little tool doesn't cost much, like 15, 20 bucks. It's worth the investment. And then of course we have like all these other type of miscellaneous connectors that we use that don't have a coating on them, and again, you're going to have to heat shrink. Now these crimp connectors I showed you, these other ones I showed you, they have the regular plastic on them. These are not heat shrink, but they actually do have these ones that have heat shrink built into them, like that. And what happens here is you crimp them on like you normally would, and then you get your heat gun and apply heat around these, and these ends will shrink up and seal up the wire. This is actually a pretty good repair. Not as good as solder, but these work well. If you had your choice and you went to the store to buy things, these are much more expensive, but they're worth it. These, not so much. These are cheaper, but you're still trying to find some way to seal to keep the elements out. These ones here will seal everything in. So these are like maybe $1 a piece as opposed to like 29 cents a piece. But like I said, you don't have to buy any kind of extra heat shrink or anything when you use these. Same thing, the color coding applies. The red one's for like a 18 to 22 gauge, and this guy's for like a 16 to 14 gauge. Shifting gears, we're going to talk a little bit about soldering wire. So I'm going to cut myself a little piece of wire here just to use as a demonstration model. And as I go through this, I'm going to basically explain to you what I expect out of you for your assignment. So, piece of wire, I'm going to strip both ends. I'm just going to take a look here. This is a 16 gauge wire. There's like a little 16 right there. I'm going to find that 16, put that guy in here like this, squeeze, pull, and it strips the wire. I'm going to do that on both sides. Find my 16, crimp, pull, there. Now, here's the thing. For your assignment, I'm not going to have you put the heat shrink on the wire because this stuff is kind of pricey. If you use like a bunch of it just for demonstration, you're wasting money. But I'm going to show you how to use it this time around. But for your assignment, please don't use the shrink wrap because we don't want to run out of it. So I'm going to cut a piece down to size. I'm going to say probably about that big will do. So I got my little heat shrink, I got my wire. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put this on the wire, and then it's on there so I don't forget about it. The reason why it's important you remember to put that on first is because once you solder the wire together, there's no way of sliding that on. If you were putting just a connector on the end of it, for example, you were using something like this and you're crimping that on, well, it's obviously smaller, so you can crimp one end on, then slide it on if you forgot. But once you solder two pieces of wire together, you're not going to slide a piece of shrink wrap on it. So I'm going to slide this on here like this, and then I'm going to prepare my wire. Now before I do so, I want to show you there's actually various sizes of solder. This piece here, this size is like still a little thick for our purposes, but this is what I use for automotive repairs. This thicker size is used more towards like plumbing. These come in like different various size rolls. This is 16 ounces, so this is like a pound of solder. It's about 30 bucks in my hand. You can buy little small tubes of it. This will work for what we're doing in here right now. There's also rosin core, and there's also non-rosin core, and there's various applications for that. But the one thing you need to worry about before you start soldering, you need to know about which tool you want to use. This is a soldering gun type, which is like pull the trigger, this lights up. It's heavy duty, it's got a lot of wattage it goes through, so it heats up faster. This is good for your general solder repairs. But if you're doing something even finer, like you're messing around inside of electronics or whatever, you might want to get yourself a good soldering iron like this. It's like a pencil. and you can still solder with it, but it heats up a little bit slower, and it doesn't work well for bigger gauged wires. It works better for like the smaller things like 22 gauge. So for my demonstration, I'm going to use the gun. So I'm going to plug my gun in, and you notice you pull the trigger, a light comes on. This is going to start smoking. Okay, I'm just going to preheat this just a little bit. While I'm talking, I'm going to show you, while this is preheating, this is flux. It comes in different various forms. This is paste. It also comes in a liquid form. It's a little bit more, I don't know, liquidy. But the gel is easier to work with because it's more of a paste. Okay, you notice how this is starting to turn red right there? That means it's heating up. I have a metal pan under here because I don't want to burn my counter. I'm going to go ahead and just put him down for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I can either cross the wires like this and twist them together and then put my flux on and then solder them, which works okay, but for the shrink wrap, you sometimes have a problem getting the shrink wrap over the two things. That's a pretty solid repair, which is still acceptable. I like to try to mimic what's inside of these, so I just put them together like this with the strands, and then I give them a twist. And I twist them together as tight as I possibly can. This is the way I prefer to do my soldering. And if you do it the other way, that's okay. You're not wrong. But I prefer it like this. So for your assignment, you should have something that starts like this. Two pieces of wire twisted together. Put some flux on it. You're going to get your soldering gun. You're also going to have your piece of solder ready because you're going to need it. Now the name of the game, some people think you sit and melt the solder onto the wire. That doesn't work. It won't stick. You need to make this wire hot, and then it acts like a siphon. It'll actually suck in the solder, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. So you can either put that on the wire like that. The tip of the gun is usually the hottest. If you can do the little balancing act, that's great, which I obviously can't. You don't want to put this directly on the pan I'm working on because the heat will dissipate through the pan and I won't accomplish what I want to accomplish. When you're working on a car, you're not going to have a pan under you working necessarily. So you're going to have to be able to figure out how to do this without dropping it off the end, which I'm trying to not do. And it's going to get pretty hot here in a second. There we go. And I'm just going to let this get hot and smoke. Once it gets so hot, what's going to happen is I'm just going to touch that with the solder, and it's going to suck it in. The soldering iron itself is pretty hot. See, it just melts right off. So I'm just going to just test it on the wire. Usually it'll start smoking pretty good. And I messed up a good thing here. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to set it on top there. Now, you see how it sucked it in? Some people do what's called tinning, where they actually touch the solder on each bare piece of wire before they put them together, then they twist them. That's an okay method too, but if you're working on cars, if you want to have a finished product that's nice and smooth like that, you want to stay away from that. Alright, so for what you have to do for me is, minus the shrink wrap, I want that. I could probably even solder this a little bit more if I want to add more to this end here, but I'm not going to. But you're going to tape this to your paper when you turn it in. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull, and I'm going to pull really hard, which I'm not going to do with this one because I want to shrink wrap it. But I'm going to pull really hard. This has to stay intact, but the wire should break. If your solder comes apart, you got a failing grade. You have to redo it. If your solder stays intact but your wire breaks, it's an A. Okay. Now, shifting gears, going forward, if I was to say this was on a car, then all I would do is once this cools off a bit, I would slide my shrink wrap like so over top, and I would get my heat gun. Now obviously you're not allowed to have a cigarette lighter in school, but cigarette lighters do work. These here, they're like $10 at Harbor Freight. They're like a hair dryer on steroids. Puts out a lot of heat. Make sure you're careful about what you're working around because it will melt stuff. So all you're going to do is you're going to take your little loop of wire right here and apply heat to it. Try not to aim towards my camera because I don't want to destroy it. But as you can see, it's shrinking up on that loop. I'm just going to kind of go in circles. Some of these shrink wraps actually have wax inside of them, and you actually see the wax bubbling out the edges. Okay? And then if this was on a car, this would be as good as new. This would be an acceptable repair. Now this is probably the best repair you can do on a car, soldering the wires together. But when I worked for Ford Motor Company, they actually recommended using these instead of soldering because they're time savers, and as far as Ford Motor Company is concerned, these are a good repair. So you use these in conjunction with the shrink wrap, and then it supposedly will be just as good as soldering. I still prefer soldering. Now one more thing, if you're working with something like a light bulb socket, anything that could be exposed to moisture or the elements, say you're working with a wiring connector underneath of a vehicle and you're worried about water getting into it, they have this stuff called dielectric grease. It works really good for inside like spark plug boots. But what's cool about this stuff is it's a grease, but it also is a conductor of electricity. It's an insulator and a conductor at the same time. So when you have two pieces of metal that are applied on either side of the grease, it allows power to flow. But if it's around something, it won't allow it to short. So it's pretty cool. This stuff here is kind of expensive. It's like 25, 30 bucks for a tube like this. But it's totally worth. This tube's been here for a long time. We only use a little bit out of the time. One little baby squeeze goes a long way. All right. Just one more little demonstration here is to kind of show you these heat shrink connectors, to show you how they function. I'm going to cut myself another piece of wire. Actually, there's a piece that's already cut. Okay, I'm going to take my wire, I'm going to trim it down, I want to strip it. It's a 16 gauge like I said. Look for my 16. With these you only need about, I don't know, 1/4 inch of wire exposed. I got about 3/4 of an inch. And I am going to twist these a little bit. Okay, like that. And then I want to take my connector, twist these up a little bit, slide these in. There's metal inside. I got to make sure this engages the metal inside the connector. I got to twist her a little bit more. Okay, I can feel it going in there, which is good. I'm just gonna, just for the giggles of it, I'm just gonna use this guy. I'm going to put a little crimp there, squeeze, pull it, nothing, twist it, put this in here, and I'm going to crimp it again. Alright, and then with my handy dandy heat gun, again I'm going to heat shrink this guy. Watch her shrink. And that does a pretty good job at sealing it. You see how the has like some liquid coming out the edges? Like great. Oh, find the camera handles here. Right there and right there you see some liquid coming out. That's actually like wax that's pushing out the edges. This is sealed. It's a good repair. It's good and solid. It's not going anywhere, and that's just as good as new. All right, so my word for the day is practice. You're not gonna like get great at soldering wire your first attempt around. If you are, then that's great, but I expect you to spend some time practicing. So when you go to do that worksheet, I want to see your best. So cut yourself some wire, solder, pull it, sit and practice for a bit. When you have one that you're 100% proud of, that you're 100% certain of, turn that one in. Come see me, get a piece of tape, tape it to your worksheet, and then everything will be great. So with that said, if you have any questions, come find me personally. I'll be happy to answer them. Have a great time.